This week on Act Out, a special episode dedicated to the most militarized land in the world, one that you may not even have ever heard of. Yet despite the seemingly global indifference, this place and these people are calling out for recognition, for basic human rights, for an end to a violent and brutal occupation. It is well past time that we listen. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So this week we have a special exclusive interview, but to get this rolling first, let me pose this question. What and where is Kashmir? Don't Google it. For some of you, you don't know because you legitimately have never heard of it. For others, there's a slight nagging itch at the back of your minds, a fleeting mention from years ago perhaps, but nothing concrete. And wherever you are on that spectrum, you're in good or bad company. Shockingly and appallingly, most people have never heard of the most militarized zone in the entire world, where there's one Indian soldier for every 15 Kashmiri locals. And I'm not saying this to be an accusatory ass or to cast a petty dig. Kashmir is objectively not common knowledge. Indeed, when I came across a panel featuring a woman from Kashmir earlier this fall, I was knocked into an eager state of remembering. Oh, that sounded vaguely familiar as I dug into mental files that have long been dusty, to recall hearing about this place some 17 or 18 years ago in school, and then nothing. And even then, it played a minor role, a momentary mention before moving on to the discussions of Indian culture and politics, which were also barely footnotes in a curriculum overwhelmingly focused on Europe and North America. But my rants on our white, Eurocentric education system aside, I was shocked and disturbed to not only hear about the situation in Kashmir, but to realize that I was wildly ignorant about it, and that much of the rest of the world was as well. So, here to change that, here to educate us and invite us in to the fight for freedom, justice, and human rights is Kashmiri researcher and filmmaker Ifat Ghazia. Take a look. So first off, can you explain briefly what the situation is between Kashmir and India, sort of background to set the foundation here?
So in 1947, India got independence from the British, and it got divided into two major territories, India and Pakistan. In Pakistan, mostly Muslims went to live, and in India, mostly Hindus stayed back. There were 565 princely states, and 13 of them acceded to Pakistan, and the rest decided to stay with India. But Kashmir, which was also a princely state at that point of time, the ruler of the Kashmir, he managed to say that we want to be independent, and he managed that thing up to 2 months after August 1947. But soon there was a lot of violence because he asked the Muslim majority people who lived in Jammu at that point of time, and they had served in British military. They had these armaments from the British military. He asked them to surrender them, which was fine. But then he gave these armaments to Hindu militants who used that same armament to incite violence and kill Muslims. At that point of time, obviously Muslims again started retaliating, and the tribesmen from Pakistan, they also entered Kashmir, and there was a lot of violence. Jammu massacre happened. Up to 200,000 to 300,000 Muslims were killed, and some 20,000 Hindus and Sikhs were also killed during that massacre. So a majority Muslim majority Jammu was converted into a minority Muslim Jammu. There was a first war. India and Pakistan fought the first war over Kashmir then, and we were not independent because there was a lot of violence. The king of Kashmir, he acceded to India. He signed an agreement and said, you send your troops to Kashmir, because Kashmir at that point was a neutral state. So he sent his troops at that day, in that year, and the troops have never left. Even though in United Nations in 1948, the United Nations directed both the nations, India and Pakistan, to withdraw their troops from Kashmir so that a referendum can happen, so that the people can decide for themselves whether they want to be a part of any of the countries or they want to be independent. But the troops never withdraw, and the Indian troops, because obviously there's no presence of Pakistani troopers in Indian side of Kashmir. But the Pakistani side of Kashmir, because Kashmir got divided into two, there is obviously Pakistani army in that part of Kashmir. India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars over Kashmir so far in these 70 years, and there's a lot of violence. The presence of the huge military in Kashmir has obviously led to countless human rights violations, be it in terms of torture, be it in terms of disappearances, killings, rapes. So, and the worst part is they enjoy a huge impunity at the hands of India. So they are never punished for what they do.
Are there the same problems that exist in the part of Kashmir that's populated by Pakistani troops?
There was a research report published. I don't remember where I read it, but they said that people in the Pakistani side of Kashmir, they also face human rights violations. And like I mentioned earlier, that in the Chatham poll, most of the people in the Indian side and the Pakistani side, over half of the people living in these two territories said that they would like to be independent. These two areas is joining together, and they want independence from both India and Pakistan.
Do you have an idea as to why politically it's important for India to hold on to Kashmir?
First and foremost, Kashmir is very resourceful. It's a good piece of land. A lot of electricity that's used in northern India, it comes from Kashmir, like from the dams that Kashmir produces. And then we can also say it's a battle of egos for them now, because India and Pakistan have been fighting over Kashmir for so long. So it's like a battle for their egos as well. Like the one country wants it, the other country wants it. It's largely about egos, and then about the resources as well that Kashmir has.
So I wanted to get into some of the numbers that you included in your documentary. In 2 decades, 8,000 men have gone missing, and an estimated 70,000 have been killed in North Kashmir alone. There are 2,400 unmarked graves. Conflict has left you with 35,000 orphans, 30,000 widows, and more than 1,500 half-widows who don't know where their husbands are. More than 7,000 victims of sexual and gender abuse. These numbers are staggering and really difficult to internalize. Can you talk about what this translates in terms of daily life, the things that we so often take for granted here, like going to school or meeting up with friends, going to the movies and things like that? What do these numbers translate to in daily life?
The life in Kashmir, it's not normal. For a person living in some other part of the world, maybe a good job, good money, and all of those things must be important for them. Good education for people in Kashmir, especially children in Kashmir. First and foremost important thing for them is, are they even safe to live? Born and brought up in conflict. I was born in early 90s, and all I saw was war and violence and people being killed. And in current times, like right now in the recent years, the trend is like they are mostly targeting younger people, children, and younger generation, which means like we won't have any future generation left. For example, it's very common for people of my generation to go out for movies or to go out and socialize. In Kashmir, there are not even cinemas. In 1990s, due to the conflict, the cinemas were converted into torture centers or into military camps, and most of them were set ablaze. So that's not a public space there anymore for people, and people very much are confined to their own houses because they don't find it safe to go out. And when it's dark, you will hardly see anybody walking on the streets because nobody prefers to go out and get marked by an unknown blood. The same goes for women, especially women also don't go out because it's not safe, and especially not in dark because of the violations that people are going through. People have to have face. For example, so many women have been raped in Kashmir, at the hands of the security forces. Entire villages have been raped in one night. So there is a lot of violence, but there is a lot of impunity as well that the Indian forces enjoy in Kashmir. Everybody is retaliating in their own way. Somebody is retaliating through their pen, somebody is retaliating online, and somebody is taking photographs or making documentaries, and someone is retaliating as simple as like going on the street. And I think that's the most dangerous way of retaliation, right? Because they maybe they don't know of any other source to retaliate, so just they go out and start pelting stones. So everyday life is not normal in Kashmir. It's not like in any other part of the world. You leave in the morning, you don't know whether you will get back in the evening or not. Like sudden encounters, bomb blast here and there. So there's a lot of chaos.
And I want to talk about your documentary, Long Ago I Died. Talk about that title and what prompted you to make this film.
So I think in 2010, it was when I was coming out of my teens and getting into my adulthood. And 2010 was really bad in Kashmir. There was a lot of violence. It was like a huge summer unrest. I think for 5, 6 months we were just under curfew inside our homes, and it was really frustrating, because in early 90s the conditions in Kashmir were really very bad. But towards 2000 to 2008, there was no peace. There was no peace. But sort of they tried to suppress the real sentiment or whatever, but visibly you will not see so much of violence. But in 2008 it erupted again, and in 2010 it was very bad. And during those days, I think it was my first time when I started using internet and everything, because internet came to Kashmir after 2008, I think. I mean, when most of the people started using it. So this boy, 7-year-old boy, Samira, he was killed by the Indian troopers just outside his home. But on the national Indian media, they portrayed it as if he died in a stampede. And that was not true. At that point of time, I met some other people like who felt like me, who thought like me, 3 other people on Facebook. So, but we were in curfew. It was like in 2010. And then when finally conditions got slightly better and people were allowed to get out of their houses, it was January 2011 when we were finally able to get out and meet. So I told them that, whatever has been happening, it's not right. So maybe we should just document it. And because since childhood I was very interested in like visual storytelling sort of a thing, I think that was one of the reasons maybe I chose to documentary. And I was not a journalism student. I had no idea how documentaries are made. I had not watched many documentaries, but I somehow wanted to document the narratives and like what people had to say who actually witnessed the murder of Samira. So yeah, I hired a camera from my teacher who happened to talk. He had a small DV cam, and I used to go out with my friends, and we found his house. You will see in the film, it's all rough footage, like when we went to the area and asking the shopkeeper where does he live, and then going to his house, interviewing his parents, and then going to the spot where he was trampled. The people coming out and giving their testimonies, like how they were watching from like the gaps in their windows, like how brutally he was killed right there on the street. He was just trying to cross the street and go to his uncle's house. It was a curfew. There was no stampede. So how could a stampede occur in a curfew, for God's sake? So the name Long Ago I Died, it was like 10 months. It was like more than, sorry, not 10 months. It was like more than a year that Samir was already killed, and we were trying to put the film together with all the narratives. So that's why we said Long Ago I Died. I mean, it has been a lot of time that, like I said, we had no experience. We're just brainstorming thoughts and putting it together. So that's how the name Long Ago I Died.
And I think that the idea of focusing on just one story like that makes it so much more powerful, because you really feel like you're being invited into their life and their pain on a much more personal level than, just kind of saying, oh, there's conflict in Kashmir. But truly, this is not an unusual story in Kashmir, and people in Kashmir live under, like you said, this constant trauma. And so one of the things that I noticed is that the film is so beautifully, painfully narrated. Lines like "I fall with every shot," words that paint a picture beyond what you see in the film. And one such line that struck me is, "Somewhere our history is at war with our truth." What did you mean by that?
If you go back in the history of Kashmir, like I said, Kashmir was an independent princely state. But right now, we are not independent. We are not a princely state. We are occupied, and we are under occupation. We are not free. We are waiting for a resolution and a referendum. It's not happening. It's not being delivered to us. This is our truth. Our truth is that we are in very turbulent times. There is no certainty about anything. But if we go back to our history, there was some certainty. At least we knew that we were independent. At least we knew that we were not a part of India, or we were not a part of Kashmir. So it's sort of juxtaposing the same thing, like how our conditions are and what we were promised. So.
And I think another line that struck me, the hermit is now the warrior. We are still walking. Let the caravan grow. And it made me think about the immigrant caravan that's currently walking towards the United States, people that have been devastated by our foreign policy and climate change. Talk about solidarity efforts that you see or that you would like to see.
Everybody in Kashmir is resisting in their own way, Even people who were just confined to their houses or to their rooms, they sort of try to express themselves and sort of express the resistance they show, and the way they retaliate, the ways they retaliate. And so especially after internet was introduced in Kashmir, more and more people became part of the narrative. We are spreading our voices everywhere and telling people like what's happening. And of course it is part of a global solidarity that you caring about Kashmir, talking about it, or giving a space on your platform to people like me to talk about Kashmir and the atrocities the people have to go through. So of course the caravan is definitely growing.
And do you see any? I remember you mentioning in that in that summit that you mentioned. You were saying, people are so aware of what's happening in Gaza, for instance, but not Kashmir. And I think here in the States, there's been a lot of focus on Gaza because we have a direct role. The U.S. funds the Israeli military so overtly and so obviously. Is there any sort of link between the U.S. and Kashmir?
So obviously that reason is very unfortunate. The role U.S. is playing in the violence that's going on in Gaza. But at least people are aware. Just recently, when I was coming back from San Francisco on a Delta flight, I had a fellow passenger. He asked me the same question. He was from United States, and he said where I was from. I told him I am from Kashmir. He didn't know where it was. So I said, can you just open the in-flight map and I'll show you where Kashmir is. So he opened the in-flight map, and I'm just searching and searching. I couldn't even see like the faint boundaries of Kashmir. Forget about like naming that Kashmir is there. And for a week continuously, I was writing tweets to Delta on Twitter that, where we are here trying so hard to bring Kashmir back into the global narrative, to have that global solidarity so that things are sorted out in Kashmir and we don't have to face any more bloodshed. You are just making it so difficult by just so conveniently erasing it. They never responded, So in terms of solidarity, of course, I want people to be at least aware of what's happening in Kashmir. And first and foremost, they don't even know where the place is.
Then this branches off into the question of solutions. And in the film, I thought it was interesting because you bring up the issue of stone throwing, both sides of that argument. And, it's interesting that all over the world, there seems to be power and discussion behind that action, whether that be at the border or in Gaza or in the streets of the United States as well. I was struck by the writing at the end, where the bullet is unasked, death becomes a dignity, and where oppression is called peace, violence becomes a virtue. How do you feel about that, and how do you feel about the issue of stone throwing other kinds of community self-defense in that way?
We have to understand, like these boys who come out on streets and pelt stones, and in recent times there are even girls who have pelt stones. It's their anger and it's the retaliation that they have inside. For example, in the film, you'll see the stone pelter who is telling his story. The first time he pelted stones was because military was just, how they open fire on innocents and just kill people. And he had his best friend lying in his lap and just dying. So he just got so mad and he was so angry. It's the only way to sort of give a vent to their anger. So he went out and started pelting stones. And then there's a cycle to it. For example, the police picking up the boys who pelt stones. they pick them up, they take them in the custodies, they torture them, and then they think that they are reformed now. They don't understand that it's only making their anger and their pain, it's making it worse. So they come out and they are like, oh, now we'll pelt more and more stones, you know. So many boys, so many stone pelters I have met and who have been through police custodies and tortures, they say that the custody only makes them more angry and they want to fight with a more stronger sense, you know. So in Kashmir, we have to understand that people who get killed unasked by unasked flights, they are martyrs, you know. So it is a virtue to sort of, it is a virtue in the society. So martyrs, people, thousands of people go to their funerals. It's not like if somebody gets killed for the cause of Kashmir, nobody cares. People in Kashmir care. Thousands of people go out and, you know, protest and become a part of their funeral. If you ask me 6 years back, maybe I had a lot of hope. I could think about a lot of things. Maybe this can happen and maybe we can have independence at some point of time. But right now, I don't know. It's like our human resources just getting over. So many young boys dying every day. So many young boys, whether they are militants who pick up the guns, and they are educated boys, you know, who have been to good universities, who are doctors and engineers and very well educated. It's just that you just can't take the occupation anymore. Nobody is doing anything about it. The world doesn't talk about it. There is no show of global solidarity. Nobody is intervening or pressurizing the countries that you finally got to decide, you know, you got to leave them alone or whatever. Just do a referendum and let's just decide. At least the bloodshed stops. But nobody is playing an active role. Nobody cares. I met a 13-year-old juvenile who has already been to police custody because he was pelting stones. The police arrested him after 10 p.m. in the night because they were coming out, you know, we have the month of Ramadan and then we have Taraweeh prayers. They go on like very late, like 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. in the night. So he was coming out of the mosque with a group of boys. So the police was waiting for him. They picked him up, rather, they dragged him the whole way, put him in the jeep and put him in the custody. He was tortured there. He was brainwashed, mentally abused. So most of them have post-traumatic stress disorder. The other boy I met, he was again a juvenile, and his parents said he's all the time, he is sweating. And in the night, if a car stops outside our house, he just comes running to his parents' room to sleep with them, you know. He is so scared because he was also picked up in the night. These are these young boys, you know, they don't even have maybe a full understanding like what's happening. They are so young and so naive. So they just feel frustrated, like my neighbor is being killed, my friend is being killed, I have to pelt stones. Nobody is understanding that. They just make the situation worse by putting them into custodies and torturing them.
So in terms of, you know, the militancy, the other side of that would be, you know, organizing peacefully. In terms of local politics, another line from the film, however loud the voices, the kings have always been deaf. But what about, you know, as opposed to the kings, are there local politics or politicians that are working to try and build something, some sort of government under the occupation to try and peacefully remove the Indian military?
This is a very interesting but unfortunate part. In Kashmir, they always hold elections. They have always held elections in the past, and like local leaders, like local people, they fight in these elections, but people don't believe them. Like we call the mainstream politicians, because they are overall headed by the Indian Prime Minister. But everybody is just trying to ignore the major issue that Kashmir is a troubled region, and we need to fix the boundaries first and the troubles first. They just focus on their own election campaigns, and that's why mostly during elections there are like election boycott calls. Not everybody goes out in Kashmir and votes. You know, it's like people who are very closely following the leaders, they might go out and vote, but I have never voted in my life. So my mother has never been to the polling station to vote. So, you know, it's like that. My father never goes to vote. I haven't seen my grandfather ever voting. So
there doesn't seem to be a point to it.
A lot of distrust in the mainstream politics.
Right. So in terms of solutions, I know you said that you had hope and now you feel more despair, but are there solutions that you see being brought up in Kashmir to deal with this, or even perhaps like in India, any movements that are going on to to deal with this from the people in India saying we should give Kashmir its independence? Are there any sort of solutions that you see in the region?
Really nothing is going on at this point of time. There's a very small fraction of people who will say that in India, I'm saying, or in Pakistan, who will say that uh, Kashmir should be independent, and I mean they should be given a choice to decide for themselves. But it's not happening. At least there's no pressure on the governments on the both sides, so that they feel that it's an urgent matter. They will win the land of Kashmir, or they will win the battle just like that. So everybody is dead one by one, and then they will have the land to themselves. Nobody is actually pressurizing them. That would have been a solution if a referendum will happen in Kashmir. Everybody will have a say to decide like what side they want to be. At least the bloodshed will stop. We can't afford to lose people every day.
If you're like me, you learned a lot by listening to Ifat. Truly, the silence surrounding Kashmir is deafening and must be combated through the raising of our collective voices on this issue. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and we cannot hope to win freedom for anyone until we recognize the oppression of all who suffer. This is where we build solidarity and solutions. To watch Ifat's documentary, go to YouTube and search for Long Ago I Died. And to learn more about the situation in Kashmir and to support the important work that Ifat and others are doing, visit jkccs.net. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please, as always, spread and share this episode with all of your friends, foes, and people that you don't know. And please do sign up for our newsletter. Thanks to social media censorship, a la Facebook, it is the best way to stay connected with our work. The newsletter link is here and will also be on the last slide and in the show description, where you can see all of the other sites that we mentioned in this week's show as well. To those who have donated, thank you so much. Please do keep spreading the word to help us keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and shoved my shove. I'm not a violent man.